Hi, I'm Avery Trufelman, host of Hark Daily, a new way to hear the best moments from the world of podcasts. Each weekday morning, you'll hear 5 captivating clips from the day's news, culture, and more, all in 20 minutes. Check it out at harkdaily.com.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in places that could expose you to identity theft. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, their US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
In the aftermath of a bruising electoral loss, the losing party begins participating in a well-worn Democratic tradition, slinging takes about what happened. This is democracy. When the voters send a dissatisfied response, the messy work of recalibration requires parsing the signal from the noise. Were voters mad because of a global inflationary environment that no Democrat could dig their way out of? Did they want to see specific breaks between Harris and Biden on policy? Were they frustrated by a candidate they saw as too left on cultural issues? There are data points in favor of many different theses. Here's where I'd put my stake in the ground, with the caveat that we still don't have a complete analysis on subgroup dynamics or even a final vote count on all the races. First, incumbents worldwide were facing tough election odds. Electorates were frustrated by the COVID inflationary years and were clearly seeking change. In Australia, Sweden, the Netherlands, France, and beyond, ruling coalitions lost power across the political spectrum. Second, I don't think Kamala Harris was ever going to be a great candidate. After Biden's disastrous debate effort in late June, and it seemed like he might be pressured to drop out, I wrote an article calling on Democrats not to coronate their vice president and pointing to key vulnerabilities she displayed and the value of an open democratic process. Figuring out how much of this is even in the campaign's control. Would it really have mattered that much if she'd gone on Joe Rogan's podcast? Or figuring out what this means for America's 2 political parties will take months, if not years. As you've heard on this podcast, I'm still arguing about what 2016 really meant for trade and immigration. My name's Jerusalem Demsis. I'm a staff writer here at The Atlantic, and this is Good on Paper, a policy show that questions what we really know about popular narratives. As a disclaimer, I worked for the Harris primary campaign in 2019 before becoming a journalist. And my guest today, Tim Miller, is a political strategist who was Jeb Bush's 2016 communications director on his presidential campaign. He's been an anti-Trump conservative since then and is the host of the Bulwark podcast. Today, we're going to talk through some of these inchoate narratives and debate which ones we think are likely to hold water. Tim, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jerusalem, what's happening?
Well, we're recording this 6 days after Election Day, and as you have seen on Twitter, and I'm sure in your various interviews, the takes are already coming in very, very hot. And this is a show where we often look at narratives that have already baked and kind of look at the research and data behind how these narratives formed and what truth is there and what sorts of things have gotten ahead of themselves. But we're in an interesting moment right now where we're seeing very important narrative formation happen in real time. In the aftermath of an election, everyone's sort of scrambling to define what happened in order to, maybe wrest control of the future of the party from an ideological perspective or just a pure power perspective. And so we're seeing a bunch of people arguing about why Trump won and why Harris lost in a time where there's a bunch of, unknowns. So we're going to go through a few of these different narratives that are coming up. But Tim, right off the bat, I wanted to ask you, what's your perception of why Trump won and Harris lost?
Yeah, I'm going to preempt my answer by saying I think that uncertainty is important in this moment, and that false certainty can lead to some very mistaken and disastrous results. I say this from experience, having worked on the Republican autopsy in 2013, that the conventional wisdom congealed very quickly, that Republicans, in order to win again, need to moderate on immigration and cultural issues, to appeal more to Hispanics and women. And not only was that wrong, but the person that became the nominee and then the president used that autopsy for toilet paper and went exactly the opposite direction.
Yeah.
It always didn't also work out in Trump's favor. In 2022, the conventional wisdom was that Trumpism was badly hurt and that like Ron DeSantis was ascendant, right? So anyway, in the week after the election, bad takes abound. That said, my answer is I'm open to a variety of different things that the Democrats might have to do, among them being maybe nothing and like watch Trump self-implode might be as simple as that. That said, the one thing that I think is certain that the Democrats need to reflect on when it comes to this question of why Trump won and why Harris lost, it's that the Democratic message is not landing outside of a particular demographic of middle to upper income, college educated, not particularly religious, urban and suburban dwelling white Americans in addition to black women, right? Like those are the demos that the Democrats are doing well with, that Kamala Harris grew her share with from last time, at least in the case of college educated women. And I think that the Democrats are doing a very poor job of communicating to people in all of those other demographics. And what they need to do, I'm very open to various possibilities about whether it's about affect or vibe or policy or whatever. But I'm certain that there is, fair or unfair, there's a perception that the Democrats don't care about these other demographics, particularly working class demographics, particularly working class men, and that they did not offer them something that was more appealing than the nostalgia and promises of gold bullion that they got from Donald Trump. And so, we can hash through all the different theories about why that was, but I think that the fact that happened is you can't argue with.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's very descriptively true. But I mean, I guess what I would want to know from you is do you feel like there are specific things that Democrats have done that tipped the scales against them? And I think that what you're outlining here, I think is very sound. There's a difference between why Harris might have lost and what the Democrats need to go do going forward to be a more electorally relevant party at the presidential level. And so I guess from your perspective, though, is there something about the Democratic argument around the economy or other issues that you think was particularly relevant this time around?
Well, I think that for starters, people were unhappy with the economy. And I don't think that the Democrats presented a message to them about how they plan to change that for the better. But again, I'm also not even really ready to concede that, with the exception of inflation being annoying and that broadly hurting people, and that the Democrats were hurt based on their economic argument. It might simply be cultural. It might be the way that they spoke and having people feel like they weren't being heard. I think the Democrats in particular always want to immediately go to, what is the policy prescription that would have appealed? And I'm it's possible that there wasn't one.
Yeah, and I mean, an important backdrop that I think you're alluding to here as well is that the inflationary environment was really, really bad for incumbents across the world, right? You're kind of going into an election where the fundamentals are sort of rigged against incumbents because the inflationary episode was just really, really hard for people. I mean, I think one narrative that I'm seeing come up a lot is about campaign strategy. And this seems like something that's going to be hashed out significantly. But I guess the question I have here is whether you think Harris could have won with a campaign run differently, even given the shortened timeline.
I'm giving another I don't know answer to that question. I don't know. I don't know. I think that she, by all accounts, ran a strong campaign that was based on her strengths. And I think she had an undeniably dominating debate performance. They ran a nice convention. Her speeches were good. The messaging pivot, the launch was good. There wasn't a lot of drama inside the campaign, right? There are other things that she isn't particularly strong at. I don't think that she is that great in unscripted moments. Sometimes she's better than others, right? And so then that's the other thing that people come to, which is like, oh, she should have done Rogan and all this. And I agree. I think she should have done more of those interviews, but they also weren't really her strong suit. And I think that this was something that might have borne out had there been a longer primary, and maybe somebody else would have emerged. But that said, I don't think so. Like, I think Kamala Harris was going to emerge from a primary no matter when Joe Biden dropped out. And so I'm not saying, oh, this was inevitable, just give up, life is, life is pain. Like, that's not really what I'm saying. I'm just saying, like, any specific thing that people are like, oh, if this tactic had been different, that would have helped. I don't really buy that. I mean, I think that broadly speaking, her having the ability to separate herself from the administration would have been helpful. But I don't, and I think that was very challenging to do, given the situation Joe Biden left her in and the time period that was left. And I think that it's very likely that she might have separated herself from the administration more and still lost. And we would have been here on this podcast with people saying, why did she distance? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Why did she break up the Democratic coalition?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. Like, I think that on the tactics, I'm sort of with you here. I mean, I was looking at some of the data analyses that are coming out now, and it looks like, at this point, given the data we have, while the national average from 2020 to 2024 shifts roughly 6 points, in battlegrounds, that number is going to end up closer to 3 points. And that speaks to campaign effects. That speaks to the fact that in battleground states where, again, the majority of the money is going, people are putting ads in battleground states. They're putting, the campaign is putting rallies there, like she's visiting. They're really working the press in those places to get her story and message out in a way that you're not really going to do in like a safe Dem county in Illinois or something. And so as a result, like what they see is that the campaign effects were good on a tactical level. Like they had, their ads were persuasive. There's evidence from Dan Rosenhack at The Economist that it looks like the campaign effects were more effective than Trump's on things like indicating things like ads and rallies were better for Harris. But I think on this like kind of broader meta question that you kind of raise, right, about Harris as the nominee, I don't think this is inevitable. I wrote an article on July 9th arguing that she was unlikely to be a good nominee and the party shouldn't coordinate her. And, Nancy Pelosi to the New York Times after I don't know if you saw this quote, after Harris's loss, she says that she had expected that if the president were to step aside, that there would be an open primary and that, maybe Kamala would have been stronger going forward if she'd gone through a primary and that the president endorsed Kamala Harris immediately, which made it impossible to have a primary at the time. But it sounds like you're saying that you think that regardless, like this would not have really changed the game that much.
Yeah, I mean, I think that had Joe Biden followed you can argue whether it was a promise or whether it was an indication that he was going to be a one-term and pass the torch, and had there been a 2-year process, maybe Kamala Harris does not emerge. But look, there are 3 really things that I think of when I hear this counterfactual about what would have happened had it been a more open process. The first thing is one of the things that the Democrats have a lot of baggage around is identity politics. I think it would have been very challenging for a black woman to be passed over.
But the Democratic primary voters did this in 2019, right? There was this argument being made, but they said, no, we care most about electability, and they chose Joe Biden.
Right, that's true. But Joe Biden had been the vice president in that case.
Yeah.
Kamala Harris was the vice president. You already saw this on social media. I saw this on social media. And I was basically for Kamala, but at the same time was like, maybe I think it'd be healthy to have an open process. And I guess if you could wave a magic wand, I probably would want Shapiro Whitmer because hopefully that would win 2 of the 3 states you need to win the presidency. And that just seems like a safer bet to me. Like that was my position. It was like pro Kamala and like, I had hundreds of people calling me a racist over that. So I think that it would have caused a lot of turmoil within the party. Now, in a longer 2-year process, is that a lot of heat that then just dies out after a while and like you settle on kind of something that's a little bit more electable and everybody gets behind it except for a few people who have hurt feelings? Maybe. Number 2, an open process opens up Gaza wound and rips that apart even wider, and I think creates potentially even greater turmoil than she already was dealing with on that issue, and that's cost her, frankly. And then number 3 is then if the theory of the case is a more electable person was someone that could get more distance from the Biden-Harris administration, that assumes that the Democratic voters were looking for somebody to do that. And that is really where the tension is here, Jerusalem, because if you look at the data, a majority of the Biden-Harris Democrats, I don't have in front of, were basically happy with the administration, right? Like there were surely big parts of the Democratic coalition, particularly younger voters, particularly working class Black and Hispanic voters, the types of people that they lost ground with, that were unhappy with the Biden administration. But I think that there was a plurality within the party that was not going to be for somebody. And look at how the response to Dean Phillips, not exactly the most talented candidate, but like total rejection and mockery for somebody who ran trying to get distance from the Biden-Harris administration. So I think it would have been very challenging to run as a candidate and get distance. So to me, it's like if we lived in an imaginary world where identity politics wasn't an issue, Gaza wasn't an issue, and there was no backlash to distancing yourself from Biden, then certainly the Democrats could have come up with a stronger option. We don't live in an imaginary world. And I think that within the world that we live in, within all those constraints, I think it's very challenging to see a situation where you end up with somebody stronger than Harris.
Yeah, I mean, all those points I think are very well taken. And I think I'm seeing a lot of people make that argument of like sort of both Harris' inevitability as the vice president and also this sort of sense that like it would have been a worse candidate. I do think that kind of my general belief is sort of like when you think you're behind, you run a high variance play. Like, you know, if you're going to lose anyway, you just kind of throw everything you can at the kitchen sink. And on this kind of inevitability point, right, like I think there is this burgeoning sense that Democrats were just repudiated across the board here. And it's like, you kind of brought this up, this idea of like Democrats do not have a good answer on economic issues or on the issues that Americans care about. But I don't know, how do you reconcile that with the clear ticket splitting you see going on here? Osborne ran 7 points ahead of the Harris ticket. Tester runs 7 points ahead of the ticket. Amy Klobuchar runs 6 points ahead. That's just in the Senate. And in the House, we see overperformances from everyone from AOC to Jared Golden in Maine, who's a much more moderate member of the Democratic coalition. I mean, doesn't that indicate at some level that candidate quality was important here and that there were other candidates that were much more electable?
For starters, running a presidential race is like so far different from running a Senate or House race that it's almost like not even the same sport, right? I mean, it's literally like T-ball versus the major leagues. I just like what people expect from there. I mean, nobody's like, oh man, does Amy Klobuchar have to go on Joe Rogan? I mean, like nobody watches Amy Klobuchar's debates. Obviously, it's a little different in Montana where you're running a competitive race. But again, just like the interest in Senate races is different. I think that the Democrats have a coalition that is perfectly durable and able to win non-presidential elections. I think that this trade in the voters that have happened from where the Democrats are picking up more high trust, more middle to high income, more college-educated voters, and the Republicans are picking up more low trust, more mid to low income, and less educated voters as a trade that accrues to Democrats' benefits in off-year elections and midterms and special elections, just because it's the type of person that shows up for those types of things, and it accrues to the Republicans' benefit in presidential elections. So that's not good when the Republicans are nominating Donald Trump, and the Republicans' presidential nominee is an existential threat to the fabric of our republic. And so that's a problem. And so I agree that if you can't look at the data and say, oh, the Democratic brand is irreparably harmed. Like, no, like the Democrats won in a lot of these Senate races. They're going to end up very narrow minorities in the House and the Senate that they will probably be able to win back in the midterms, depending on what happens. But I think that there are two things, which is, number one, the Democrats are not well suited to running presidential elections right now in this media environment. And then number two is that the Democrats have abandoned huge parts of the country where they are not viable, and that's particularly problematic given the Senate and Electoral College and the way that's set up. So, okay, back to number one. Democrats are really good at running campaigns that are set pieces. Like they have professionals that are running these campaigns. The ads, the conventions, the speeches, the going to the editorial board meetings, the 2004 type campaigns. And that's how Senate and House campaigns are basically still run in most of the country, and even governor's races, right? Like people just don't care about those races at that deep of a level. But like the presidential race is like the media environment around it is so different. I mean, people are consuming information about the presidential race on their TikTok, listening to sports talk, listening to their random podcasts that aren't about sports at all, that are cultural, on women's blogs, at a school function, people are talking about it casually. You know what I mean? Like, just think about, like, I mean, I'm a parent, like, and obviously this is a little bit of selection bias since I'm in politics and people know that, but like, people don't come up to me and ask me what I think about the House race in my district. Nobody's mentioned Troy Carter to me at any events, at any school functions or any of my kids' sporting events. Okay,
he's gonna get his name out there.
And so it's just the information environment is just a total category difference. And Trump and even J.D. Vance in certain ways were able to take advantage of that by running campaigns that are a little bit more unwieldy, that are better for viral clips, that are also better for like sitting down for 2 hours and broing out with Theo Von and talking about how you can't even do coke in this country anymore because the fentanyl is in it, right?
Yeah.
She wasn't doing any of that. And like doing one of those interviews isn't really the answer, right? It's like, can you communicate in a way that feels authentic? It might be fake authenticity, but in a way that feels authentic to people in their Instagram stories, in their TikTok, in their podcasts, whatever. And Democrats are not like producing a lot of candidates who I feel like are good at that.
But I think there's also like this broad concern that the media ecosystem itself is not producing convincing, progressive-sounding or left-leaning media personalities. There's a 2017 AER study that I remember being like very, very shocking to people when it first came out right after the Trump's election in 2016. And there are a couple of economists. They look at the effect of Fox News, and they find that watching Fox News for an additional 2.5 minutes per week increases the vote share by 0.3 percentage points. But watching MSNBC has essentially no effect. And they see that like Fox News is actually able to shift viewers' attitudes rightward. And they look at 2004 and 2008 and find that Republican presidential candidates' share of the two-party vote would have been more than 3 points lower in 2004 and 6 points lower in 2008. If without Fox News. And so that's something where I'm just like, there is something to the fact that the media ecosystem does not have that sort of like targeted apparatus. But my usual belief about these sorts of things is that like we're discounting the fact that so much of the media is so liberal that like Fox News can have this large effect because it's, I think stands out amongst kind of like a pack of more liberal institutions. But I am kind of surprised that MSNBC has like no effect.
Yeah. I mean, as a person on MSNBC, did that study go on before I was a political contributor? I think it did. So
yeah. Now all of a sudden,
we might need to update the study and have them focus on my hits and see if that changes anything. I guess I want to noodle on that for a little bit. That does surprise me a little bit as well. But I would say this. I mean, I think that I'm less concerned. I think there's a category of person out there, and maybe this is right, that is focused on the Republicans have better propaganda outlets than the Democrats do.
Yeah.
And maybe that's true. I don't know. So to me, then the question is, okay, what can be done? Like, what is realistic in this media environment? And it goes back to this question of, can the Democrats speak more through using existing outlets or finding a candidate who has a compelling story in their own right or compelling communications skills to figure out how to speak to people that don't watch mainstream news? Right. And like, that's just really what it comes down to. Like the Democrats are very good at talking to people that are high information, high engagement, high education, middle to high income, and offering persuasive arguments. I think that they're not good at talking to anybody else. And Obama was good at that. And Clinton was good at that. And we're in a totally different media environment now than we were back then. But I think that there's still things that can be learned from that.
After the break, why the abortion ballot measure strategy didn't pan out for the Harris campaign.
Hi, I'm Avery Trufelman, and maybe you can relate to this. There's so many great podcasts out there, but it's impossible to listen to them all. That's why I'm so happy to be the host of Hark Daily, a new way to hear the best moments from the best podcast conversations. Each weekday morning, you'll hear 5 captivating clips from amazing podcasts on the day's news, culture, and so much more, all in 20 minutes. And it's totally free. Check it out at harkdaily.com.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in places that could expose you to identity theft. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, their US-based restoration specialists will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
I want to pull us out of this sort of media conversation here because I think that there's also this, let's say, things go a little bit differently. And again, the margins here are not very big. And Harris has won. I think one of the big things we'd be hearing right now is that she won because of abortion, right? And looking at election night, you see a lot of wins for abortion. There are 10 states that have referendums on abortion policies, and 7 of them win. New York, Maryland, Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, Montana, Missouri. And in Florida, where it loses the threshold 60% and it earns 57%. So it lost, but there's clearly a majority in favor. And, it's going in, especially after the midterms, there was a real feeling and, the big narrative that came out of those midterms was that abortion is the place where Democrats can clearly distinguish and can clearly win over Republican candidates, and even in deeply Republican states, and especially in deeply purple states. And I'm trying to think through this. What explains in your mind the sort of difference between how many voters were saying, yes, I do have more liberal views on abortion, I'm willing to express those in these ballot measures, but no, I'm not going to then reward Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris for it?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. Number one, this tension exists as old as time, and it's particularly existed as old as time as places like Florida. I did one of these. Time is a flat circle. I forget which election it was at this point, but it was like, how did the minimum wage increase ballot initiative in Florida pass at the same time that Ron DeSantis won by 18 points or whichever election that was? And it's like voters are complicated. Voters have complex views. And so you see this as kind of just a common thing in voter habits. In this case, I think that there were a couple of complicating factors in addition. Number one was Donald Trump muddied the waters on his views. Yeah. And I think that Donald Trump's whole brand and vibe, I know we're getting outside of the data space that you like to be in, Jerusalem, but there's a certain group of people that are like, yeah, that guy's not going to ban abortion. Yeah. No. You know what I mean? Yeah. And there's just some percentage of voters out there that's just it. He doesn't come off like Ted Cruz on abortion. He comes off as different because then they assume that he paid for an abortion or whatever, that he doesn't care about it and that he's not going to, this isn't going to be what he's focused on. There are going to be people that are pro-choice that just prioritize their economic views or their nativist views, right? So that is going to be some of it. I think less so in Florida, but more in Arizona. To me, I think that there was actually a strategic backfiring of having these ballot initiatives on the ballot almost gave some people an out to do both. Right? People that did not like Kamala Harris or that were more center-right, and said, oh, okay, great. I can protect abortion in Arizona and also vote for Donald Trump. I can have my cake and eat it too.
Yeah, I think my read of it is more that when you think about the specific argument being made about abortion, it was largely he's to blame for all these horrible things that are happening to women in states that have made abortion inaccessible. And by he, I mean Trump is to blame for that. And also, he appointed these Supreme Court nominees who overturned Roe v. Wade. But as a prescription for the future, right, I feel like there was not a real clear argument made to voters of, how Kamala Harris is going to actually protect abortion. But again, it all comes back to the overarching question, did voters view this as an abortion election? And it seems clear that they viewed it as an inflation election. That was the core thing that they were focused on. And And I think that, like, one thing that I've heard a lot is sort of what this means for, like, understanding America, right? So after 2016, people were just, I think, in shock and were saying, like, I can't believe this is the country I live in. And again, here I'm hearing the sort of question of, this is a black mark on the conscience of America, that people would vote for someone who threatened to overturn the results of the 2020 election, who talks with such liberal disdain for women and immigrants. And, something someone said to me in 2016 was really interesting. If your entire perception of America would have shifted if a few 100,000 people voted differently, like, maybe don't, like, completely change everything you believe about everyone. And to me, I think that this framing is about, Trump's reelection means something really dark about all the people that voted for him, doesn't really sit well with me, because it seems like people are voting based on cost of living. And at the same time, too, I think they're taking their signal from Democrats who, if they'd taken their own warnings about the threat of fascism or the threat to our institutions, I think would have behaved very differently over the past couple of years in trying to win.
Yeah. It doesn't change my view of the American people, really. That's kind of like, they're good people and bad people everywhere. They're people that we all have good and bad inside of us. I'll say that what it does impact for me, and maybe this is wrong and maybe I'm raw and it's 6 days out, but for those of us who do have a belief that there's something kind of special about the American system, and that have revered America, that understand that America is flawed and has made mistakes, but still is unique, a unique experiment in the world. The America is an idea type of thing. Man, the idea is pretty dim at this point. And to me, that is the change, having him win again, that I'm having trouble getting over mentally, is not that it makes me look more poorly at my neighbors, but that like, we just might be at the end of the experiment, in the sense that America is something different than Hungary or Switzerland or whatever, any country, you name the country, right? It was the old fight with the Republicans and Democrats during the Obama years, which is like, Obama doesn't think of America as any different than Belgium. Obama believes in Belgian exceptionalism. And that, to me, is kind of where I am. It's like, I think that we are about to move into an era where America's flaws, in addition to all of our existing flaws, like gun violence and our history of racism, et cetera, but the America's systems flaws look a lot more like what flaws look like in other countries. Like there's going to be oligarchy, kleptocracy, corruption, that there's no special sense that the huddled masses around the world are welcome here any more than they might be welcome anywhere else. They frankly are probably going to be welcome here less than they're welcome in certain other places. And so to me, that is what I see differently. I reserve the right to change my mind about that at some point, but that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I think in contrast to sort of this large, view about the American idea maybe being different than we believed beforehand, is this, I think, really popular take that's picking up steam, which is about just Democrats just need to moderate on cultural issues. Like whether it's about immigration or it's the issue of trans women and girls in sports, they're just too left of the median voter, and that you don't actually need to do a bunch else other than accept that people are where they are on those places and not go so far away from it. The data point that's kind of in favor of this, particularly on the trans girls in sports one, is Kamala Harris's leading super PAC, Future Forward, finds that the most effective, or one of the most effective Trump ads is one of the Kamala is for they, them, President Trump is for you ads. They find that it shifted the race 2.7 percentage points in Trump's favor after people watched it. I guess, how relevant do you think that the Democratic Party's leftward shift on cultural issues is to Harris's loss? And there's some people who I think are really making the claim that it is like, you could just really focus on this and you don't need to make these kind of larger arguments about strategy or how we're speaking to America on economic policy.
I don't think that this was alone to count for Harris's loss, or even maybe the biggest thing to account for her loss. I think that she didn't really respond to that ad in particular quite well, and that maybe that was a strategic mistake. That I think her campaign, and she didn't run like an overly woke, culturally left campaign. So the question is, did the Democratic brand on those issues drag her down? I think possibly. To me, it's like, look, could Kamala Harris have squeaked out a victory this time while holding the same positions on trans issues had inflation been 20% better? Like maybe, probably, like it wasn't like it was a clear victory for Trump, but it wasn't, I mean, it was not Reagan 84. Okay. Like had a couple of things changed, and had that won, the cultural stuff stayed static, could she have still won? Clearly. I mean, Biden won in 2020 when all of those issues were more high salience, I think, than they were this time. Biden, not a black woman, so maybe there's something to that as well, that he was able to be a little bit more resilient against attacks on those issues. So maybe that's worth thinking about. I would say this, though. If the Democrats want to have 60 senators again ever, then yeah, they got to moderate on cultural issues. You know what I mean? There are two ways to look at this, right? Like, can Democrats still win elections by maintaining their views on everything? Yes. Are the Democrats giving away huge swaths of the country by not really even engaging with their concerns about the leftward shift of the party on a wide array of issues? Yeah, like they are. I mean, you can just, I get the land doesn't vote thing, like I get it.
Yeah.
But like you
We've all
look at
seen
the
the
map,
maps.
but the map is still the map. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like, and Trump gained in all of those little red counties out there where it's just land, all right? But he gained, there are a handful of people out there, and he got more of them in every county. And the Democrats, I think, choice to just say, well, we're just giving up on that, and we're just going to focus on the more dynamic parts of and growing parts of the country, and eventually, and demographics are destiny, and blah blah blah. That looks like a pretty bad bet today. And so, yeah, I'm not out here being like, yeah, you got to throw trans people or migrants under the bus for them to win. But certainly, the cultural leftward shift has created a ceiling on Democratic support that I think has a negative impact for the party, but also for progress on a lot of those issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously like very up in the air here how people are going to take this mantle of how you should moderate, and I think that there's bad and good ways that people can take this, and I think that there's like a level to which you don't have to be, I think, throwing trans people under the bus. Maybe we need to figure out ways, whether it's how Democrats responded to this in with gay rights, where they talked about federalism a lot and like made sure the country kind of moved towards the issue before kind of making it a national issue. But I mean, to me, I think the most important and damning thing that Democrats are clearly responsible for in the choices they have made is about the poor governance in blue cities and states. I mean, this is like kind of one of my hobby horses, but you see massive shifts, as you mentioned, in places, high cost of living places that are heavily Democratic in New York and in California and in a lot of the Northeast. And I think it's hard to see that as anything other than just repudiation of Democratic governance, and particularly the cost of living and the cost of housing in these places. And so to me, it's like when you talked about the Democratic brand, I mean, when you're in a cost of living election, yes, there are marginal effects on these cultural issues we're talking about here. Yes, there are things that campaigns can do better. Yes, there are candidate effects. But if people are asking themselves, what does it look like? How does it feel to my pocketbook to live in a democratically run state versus a Republican one? I feel like they're being told a very clear story.
I think that that's true. I've been ruminating on this a lot over the past week. I live in Louisiana. So there is the kind of like emotional guttural response I have to this, which is, do you think Louisiana is being governed that well? Because I don't.
Yeah.
Well,
on cost, though, right? It's cheaper, obviously, to have a house in Louisiana.
Sure, it's cheaper to have a house in Louisiana because of the economic destruction of the state over the past couple of decades, and the fact that everybody that grows up in parts of the state that's not this corridor between New Orleans and Baton Rouge leave home, and a lot of people in these places leave home too, looking for better economic opportunities, and that's sad for the state. So, on the one, like that is like my initial response, which is emotional, which is like, okay, sure, but why does Kamala Harris have to carry the baggage for the place I used to live, Oakland, but Donald Trump doesn't have to carry the baggage for the hollowing out of Louisiana, of big parts of Louisiana? That said, it's true that it hurt the Democrats, right? And it's also true that the Democrats have been badly managing these big cities. And if you just look at the numbers, suburban Democrats, and this could be a counter argument. Now I'm going to really give you a galaxy brain, Jerusalem.
Yeah.
To your original data point earlier, that the 3-point effect for, in the battleground states versus national speaks to a campaign effect. Maybe. Maybe it also speaks to the fact that a lot of these battleground states are made up of places that have mixed governance and big suburbs, where the Democrats are doing better. Democrats are doing better in suburban America because they're not feeling the acute pain of governing issues that have plagued a lot of the big cities. And surely there are a couple of big cities in those 7 swing states, but none of the ones you think of when you think of major disruptions. And that maybe that explains it, and that the Republican gains were in a lot more of those than those places like that, Illinois, New Jersey, California. Anyway, just something to noodle on. But I think that it is objectively true that Democrats are doing better in places that have not been plagued by some of these bad governing decisions on crime and on housing that we've seen in Democratic cities, and that Democratic mayors and Democratic governors in blue states should fix that. And it's the number one thing, the last thing I'll say on this is the number one thing that comes to mind when I already hear stupid parlor game stuff about 2028, and it's Gavin Newsom and J.B. Pritzker. And it's to me, it's the number one thing Gavin Newsom and J.B. Pritzker need to do if they want to run in 2027 is make Illinois and California run better in the meantime. Otherwise, nothing against either of those two guys, but I think that they're going to carry this baggage that you're talking about.
Well, I could go on about housing in blue states forever, and I will. There's an article popping, I think, today, listeners, as you're hearing about this, about why I think this was a big issue for the election. But Tim, always our last and final question.
Okay.
What is something that you once thought was a good idea, but ended up only being good on paper?
Oh, okay. Hold on. I wasn't prepared for this. I misread the question. I thought it was an idea that was only good on paper that then ended up being not good on paper. And I was man, no. I'll come up with one where I'm wrong. I'm happy to bet where I'm wrong. I was just saying the ideas are endless on those.
Yeah. Something that you held.
An idea that I thought that was good on paper that ended up not being good on paper. Well, I guess I have to give the obvious answer to that question. Sadly, I don't get to rant about daylight savings time as I hope to. An idea that was certainly good on paper in the 1800s or whenever they came up with it, that's no longer good. Falling back, that is. Permanent daylight savings time, good idea. Changing times, not good.
400 electoral votes for whoever does this.
Yeah, the idea that I thought that was good on paper, that is relevant to this podcast, because I literally put it on paper and wrote it, was the aforementioned 2013 GOP autopsy.
Oh, yeah.
Well, how great. Compassionate conservatism. Republicans can diversify their party by getting softer on cultural issues and reaching out to the suburbs and reaching out to Hispanic voters and black voters, criminal justice reform, and that through criminal justice reform and immigration reform and softening on gays, that Republicans can have a new, diverse electorate, and we can all move into a happy, bipartisan future. That was a great idea on paper that backfired spectacularly, and now the Republicans have their most diverse electorate that they've had ever, I think, voting for Donald Trump after rejecting all of those suggestions that I put on paper. So there you go.
As one kind of vote of confidence for younger Tim, there are very many ways that, history could have gone. I think that people often forget, how contingent things are and how unique of a figure Trump is. And right now we've talked through a bunch of different ways that people are reading this moment, but there are a lot of ways that, people can go, depending on what candidates do and say and how they catch fire and their charisma and what ends up being relevant in 2 years and in 4 years. So, a little bit of, sympathy for younger Tim.
I appreciate that. And that is true. Who the hell knows, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Had Donald Trump not run that time and he decided he wanted to do some other scam instead, then maybe Marco Rubio is the nominee. And those things
if Obama doesn't
make
make fun of him at the White House Correspondents' Center, we're not even sitting here on this podcast.
Great job, John Lovett, or whoever wrote that joke. Just joking.
Well, thank you so much, Tim. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Jerusalem.
Good on Paper is produced by Janae West. It was edited by Claudine Abade and engineered by Erica Huang. Our theme music is composed by Rob Smirciak. Claudine Abade is the executive producer of Atlantic Audio. Andrea Valdez is our managing editor. And hey, if you like what you're hearing, please leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. I'm Jerusalem Demsis, and we'll see you next week.
Hi, I'm Avery Trufelman, and maybe you can relate to this. There's so many great podcasts out there, but it's impossible to listen to them all. That's why I'm so happy to be the host of Hark Daily, a new way to hear the best moments from the best podcast conversations. Each weekday morning, you'll hear 5 captivating clips from amazing podcasts on the day's news, culture, and so much more, all in 20 minutes. And it's totally free. Check it out at harkdaily.com.